Hey guys, welcome back to another Crystal of Atlan video. This time we're trying something a little bit different, and I just wanted to go ahead and talk about some of my thoughts on Crystal of Atlan and why I think you should be playing, or at least you should check it out. So as I mentioned, we are kind of trying something different with this video. So in the background, what you're actually going to see is the four-man version of the raid for Crystal of Atlan. It's currently the only endgame raid, and I am doing the four-man version of it. The elite version, the eight-man, does seem to be a little bit stronger than I currently am, as mostly free to play. We've only spent $15, so this is kind of just, you know, background footage of that while I'm just kind of talking about these different things, and then I'll put up clips and stuff for you guys to see. Okay, so for starters, one thing I really think is really cool about this game, and there are a bunch of different things, but one thing I think is really cool is the fact that every class has its own identity. And as I mentioned previously in, one of my other videos, this game is very much about your roster. You can only play one character, but they very much encourage you to play multiple characters, and that's kind of by design. They even talked about it recently on their newsletter. And so they do really want you to do multiple characters, kind of level up your adventure team rank and that kind of stuff, and just kind of see the amount of content that they have available across all of your characters, not just playing one. So for a perfect example of this, I have both fighter classes, and what you'll see is I'll go ahead and put them on the screen now. The difference is pretty staggering. So the Strider class, I forget exactly what it's called, the Cloud Strider, I think. So it does more of like kind of like chi slash monk animations and abilities and stuff like that, and focuses on doing magic damage. Where the Starbreaker is all about kind of being like, have you ever seen Vi from League of Legends or Arcane? She's got these like rocket gauntlets, and she's doing physical damage and just like really big, brutal like smashing attacks and stuff like that that just feel really, really fantastic, but in a very different way from the other fighter class. So that's just kind of one example of the classes having really, really cool identities that are very, very different from each other, even though they're the same archetype, right? They're both considered to be the fighter like main class, but they're divergent from each other in a way that's really, really cool and satisfying. Another thing that's really cool, and it kind of like leads into all of that, is the skill tree system. You can figure out exactly how you want to tailor your build for any occasion, and they have presets available and everything like that. They even have systems in place where you can go and you can look up, let's say I want to look up the best Scythe Guard character or player on PvP and I want to steal their build. You can even do that, and it's pretty simple. It's all in game. You don't have to manually do it or anything. So the skill variety that you can have and that people can experiment and kind of play around with, I think is phenomenal in this game. Most games have like a wow head or a max roll, and maybe there is something like that for this already. But in my experience, you don't really need to min max that much. You kind of just play with abilities that are fun. So, like one example was there was an ability on the fighter class, on both classes, where you run up to something and you grab them and you throw them on the ground and it bounces them backwards. I personally didn't like that ability because it basically made it so I had to use that and then I had to use a dodge to get back to them. Even though it did more damage than some of my other abilities, I don't take that skill and I'm still able to do a lot of damage for my gear level and kind of compete and play with that anyway, in where my character should be. So it doesn't really matter that I haven't min maxed my damage 100%, and there's a lot of cool, fun discovery that can happen when you can just experiment with your skills and stuff like that. So hopefully you guys have kind of seen too from the background footage and maybe even some of the other stuff that I posted. But combat in this game is really fun. The way that they've done the combat is that you have four buttons plus your finisher and then your pet skill that you can do, and each one has two buttons basically that you can attach to it. So, for example, if I was to put something on my one key, when I press the one key, that first ability goes on cooldown, and then the next ability on the one key pops up, and I can use that ability. And then I can, once they're both on cooldown, you'll just see that they're both on cooldown. They have little icons and stuff like that that are spinning around to show you the kind of loading progress of it. But the cool thing about that is that it lets you set up really cool and interesting combos. So I have one ability, for example, that on my gunslinger, I like jump in and do like a dash attack to the ground and do a bunch of damage around me. And then another ability tied to the same button where I jump up in the air and I spin around, doing a bunch of different shots around me as well. So I kind of jump and leap into the enemy, and then like I said, do a bunch of AoE damage and stuff like that. And so what you'll see is on a lot of my characters, I kind of have that. Usually it's attached to my third button if you're interested in seeing it from the gameplay. Um, on my main, for example, I do that to dash in, and then immediately I use the follow up ability that shows up from that button to do the damage reduction. Just kind of make sure that I have it up as often as possible. But like I said, there's cool and intricate little like gameplay loops that you can have with that. So you can have them be, you can pick two fast cooldown abilities, or you can pick like a fast cooldown ability on the first hit, and then a slow one on the back one, or vice versa, right? A big hit up front, and then follow up with a bunch of small hits that just reset faster. Any combination you can think of. And so it's one of those things that's really cool and turns it from being like a multi-button game to something that's more handleable, I think, on controller specifically. It does seem very much like it was designed to help controller play, but I think it's actually pretty satisfying in the way that you can line up combos for yourself. And you do actually have to do some like theory crafting. Do I want to have those cooldown abilities up front? Do I want the big abilities up front? And then lining up these different combos, are these similar in cooldown, right? Like you don't want to have a combo that's like a 15 and a 35 second. So maybe you have a combo that's like a 40-second and a 42-second. So just cool stuff like that that you can kind of mix and match and kind of adjust to whatever your playstyle is. Another reason why I think this game is actually really cool is because there is a pretty wide range of content that has you doing different things on all your characters. Most of the rewards for all of these things, by the way, are not shared amongst your account, which can be a little annoying, but actually can be kind of cool because it gives you things to do and ways that you can work on things and make progress. Um, so there's stuff in the game that ranges from single player to duos to 4 mans to 8 mans. The reason why that's really cool is because, as I mentioned before, a lot of games try and do the thing where they convert content that was made for, more players down to single player play or whatever. And it just doesn't really work out very well. A lot of times you'll have Frankenstein fights like they do in Lost Ark, where they're meant for 8 players or whatever, and then when they move them to solo mode they have to completely rework them, and so they're not even good learning mechanisms or anything like that. And so I just really think it's cool that they are obviously having it in mind, that they are designing these things for different varieties of players, right? Even having the raid has a solo version, the raid has a 4 man version, and the raid has an 8 man version. And I think that those are very, very cool and how they play out differently. Another thing I think is pretty cool is that this game has done a pretty good job of keeping damage relevant for support players. So in other games, you might have your support player that only focuses on healing, or in Lost Ark, the majority of their contribution to the team is buffing your teammates so they do more damage. In this game, at least so far with our one support class, it does a very good job of providing healing and also buffing damage and then also doing damage. I think it's kind of a nice, happy medium because oftentimes people find the healing support only being a little boring or the buffing support only being a little boring as well. Still pretty important to be able to do all your dailies and everything. So I do think it's pretty valuable. So for example, when I go and do my dailies, I usually am actually in the top 2 for damage, but usually, in those longer fights and stuff like that, it's less so, right? I'll definitely be towards, the bottom on the damage list compared to those true DPS classes. But also, there's the first fight in the raid, which is a cool example too, because the first fight actually splits you up and everyone's on their own. So what will happen usually is the support players will end up damaging their target or whatever, and then one of the DPS players will finish and then come help them. But the cool thing about that is that I've actually gotten on multiple attempts now. My main can almost clear the first boss by myself before I get help from a friend. So obviously my damage is, somewhat keeping up, even though I do have more of those support abilities that are specifically designed to, do things like damage reduction and doing healing and stuff like that. So it's very cool that it has kind of the nice flexibility of doing all the different things. And I'm sure if I had a spec that was purely dedicated to damage, I actually probably could be keeping up much closer with those damage dealing classes. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room. Everyone always complains about the energy system, for example. The thing is that this is meant to be a roster game, like a team game, where you play multiple different characters. They even, like I said, recently mentioned that in their newsletter online. If you go on social media, Crystal of Atlan, you should be able to find it. And so basically, their way of looking at the energy system is that they do want you to have multiple characters, and each character has their own individual energy. Once you have a level 60 character, you will unlock account energy, so you can focus more on one single character if you choose to. But again, you can also just work on your energy on every character and stuff like that. Personally, I kind of like the idea of playing an account rather than a single character. So for me, this hasn't really been too big of an issue. And there are many pieces of content that you can actually do and make progress on that don't actually take any energy. Things like the wave system and stuff like that. And people are on like wave 200 and whatever. And it takes you a while to get there. So you're not going to have nothing to do for a while. I haven't even touched a lot of the single player content that doesn't even take energy, the things like the dual bonds, elite mode, and stuff like that yet. Because I've been so focused on spending my energy on each character to try and min max my drops, especially as free to play. Just trying to gear up my whole roster. But at this point, okay, I say free to play, but like I said, we spent $15. I'm not intending to spend more. That's not currently on the docket kind of thing. But my point is that like, even with only $15 spent pretty close to free to play, I've already gotten 5,000 nullification, which is what you need to do the maximum stuff in the game. I can do everything in the game on my main, technically. Maybe not DPS wise, but as a support, it's not as relevant. The Again, bringing it back to the point, there's a lot of stuff to do, and there's a lot of stuff that you can do without energy, and even then, while you're working on your roster, you can still get the gear that you need to do all the content in the game. I'm very, very confident that having, if I didn't spend the $15, it would have just been a little more time that I would have had to invest it into getting my character to 5,000 nullification. Uh, Maybe I got a little bit lucky on drops, but RNG goes the way that it goes. And so that just happens sometimes. But there is a pretty pure system in the game that if you do every single day, you can eventually get there over a certain amount of days. So if you're doing that, you should be able to fill in whatever drops you don't get and get to that high level nullification fairly easily. So all that going back again, like there's literally stuff that I haven't even done. Even on my main, I haven't gotten past 124 waves. I definitely could. I'm strong enough to do that now. But I just haven't had the time because I'm doing everything else. Even the raid doesn't take energy, it takes tickets that you get from other activities that you spent energy on. And like I said, once you unlock account energy at level 60, you have a lot more energy that you can play with, even on a single character if you choose to. So there's just a lot of stuff to do. And to be honest, most days that I played Crystal of Atlan, especially in the first week, I was playing for 8 hours or longer a day. And that was trying to get all my characters to level 60. And then once I got there, it was like trying to fill in the rest of my roster. Even now, I have another character I want to work on, but I just haven't had the time. Part of that is because I have been trying to progress the raid, which isn't super easy, which is cool. It's very nice to see, especially for the first raid of a new game. And then also I've been progging a raid in Lost Ark as well. So it's been a bit of a busy week this week in particular. But again, I just want to reiterate, I have probably put in over 100 hours of Crystal of Atlan at this point, and many of those days were 8 to 10 hour days where I played in one sitting. And so am not running out of things to do. There is a lot to do, to work on. I've barely even touched PvP, and I really want to get the PvP endgame outfit and stuff like that for hitting the highest levels in PvP. So I need to get rocking on that. as well as, like I said, Duel of Bonds, and I gotta get the waves up to 200, whatever. I gotta make a DPS spec, and and min max the solo waves at the end of the wave activity, because you can only do 4-man waves up until a certain point. There's a lot to do in this game, and like I said, all of that you have to do on multiple characters. So once you really start thinking about it, like, the energy system doesn't really play out to be a big factor. For me, what I actually do is I go and I hit my specific dailies that I need to make sure that I'm making progress on all my characters in their gear. And then after that, I just try and go and either spend energy or try, doing something that I wasn't doing before, whether it be, the raid, or trying out PvP for the first time, or whatever. And even then, like I said, that takes a long time. And for the other elephant in the room, the monetization. Look, the monetization on this game is awful, okay? And I'll even fully warn everybody here, the honing system is also awful. Now, there are things that make it a little bit easier, and you can get a decent amount of gear with just, taking advantage of some of that stuff. But at some point, I really hope that they rework the honing system, because it has got to be the worst I've ever seen in any game. And the same with the monetization. I hope that they rework all of those things, stuff like that. But currently, on my characters, that doesn't feel like a barrier for anything I'm trying to do. Maybe it will feel like a barrier if I wanted to do the 8-man content, the elite version of the raid. But my characters just aren't there yet, and my main is a support, so it's hard to know that for sure. Once I get a DPS character there, which I'm working on trying to do, I'll have a better idea on what kind of damage levels are required. But if the only thing I can't do is the very most pinnacle of content, to be honest, that's not too crazy for me. If I can still do, the solo and the 4-man version of all the raids, I think I can still play this game and very much have fun with that. At some point, I do want to step into the 8-man raids and then get a better feel for, like, the damage requirements and things like that. And I'll definitely do a video when I do get there. But I'm having a ton of fun with everything else in the game right now, and that was kind of what I wanted to share with you guys. Is that, like, I'm able to have all this fun with the game, even though there are bad systems like the energy system and the honing system and stuff like that. And so hopefully you guys can kind of see all of these cool things that this game has going for it too, and get a little bit of enjoyment out of it. It's free to play, right? At the end of the day, even if you have fun for a little bit of time and then those other systems end up being too much for you, I totally get it. Hopefully they'll change it in the future, but it's free to play. Might as well enjoy it while you can, and enjoy the pieces of content that come out as they come out, and just have a fun time playing a video game. And I think a lot of times people see something and they're like, "Oh, I just can't bother with that because that system's in the game." It's like, if we're being honest, every system has, or every game has a system that I hate, if I'm being honest. And that's just the way things go. It's kind of sad. But every single game that you play, live service game in particular, not like solo player games, um, but every single live service game is gonna have a system that you don't like. That's gonna have some friction, because in a way they're kind of designed to from the start. And this is just how they get you to log in every day. It's how they get you to grind longer. A lot of companies believe that adding friction adds grind, and people like that. And maybe there is some merit to that. Actually, we'll have to see in this game in particular if these are things that get fixed over time, or if it does, be a barrier. But I'm enjoying my time right now, and I really wanted to share that with you guys on all the cool things and all the awesome stuff that I think this game has going for it. If you guys made it this far in the video, I really appreciate it. Interact with the video as you normally would, comment, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. We're definitely going to be continuing to make Crystal of Atlan content in the future, and so yeah, look out for that, as well as more Lost Ark stuff, and you know probably some Destiny 2 stuff coming in the future. We'll see. I'm not super happy with that game at the moment, but anyway, I'll catch you guys in the next one, and peace out.